Hello, welcome everybody. This is where I'm planning to do my broadcast with Stefan on Sunday. I'm just in my dining room, and I am not exactly sure, not completely sure if my internet connection is strong enough out here to actually broadcast. So I'm curious if you're getting a lot of glitching in the video right now, or if it's coming through nice and clear. I'm actually watching this on my phone as well, and it looks like it's actually coming through pretty clear. I cannot hear myself because I've got my sound down, but looks like sound is coming through. I'm not totally sure if I like the lighting in here. I can actually make the lights a little bit brighter. 1 second. That's better. I like that. It's not too harsh. So I figured since I'm doing this and I want to test for a while to see, whether or not we get, sorry, just checking the lights here. Yeah, whether or not we get a lot of glitches with the internet connection here. So let's just do some Q&A. I've got 2 questions already that were sent to me before this. And so let me just get started on those. And then if you have any other questions, let me know in the comments here in the live chat, and I will try to answer those as well. And because there's going to be some side chatter in the box here. Oh, hello, shelled reptile. Because there's going to be some side chatter in the live chat, just go ahead and at me, do at stated casually, so I make sure to see any questions that you have. So the first question that I got was about books. What books are the best when you are first starting to learn about evolution? And well, this book right here, Evolution in Minutes, not only is this one that I recommend for people that are new to studying evolution, it's one that I recommend for people that have already been studying evolution or teaching evolution for a long time, because this book is just a whole bunch of really short articles. So here's one on eukaryotic cells, for example. This was written by Darren Naish, who's one of my favorite science educators. He's a paleontologist, and he's now not even working for a university. He's gone freelance, which is pretty cool, pretty brave for someone to step out of academia and go freelance. But he's written this book. I guess this is a whole series, not by him, but the book company, the publisher, is doing a whole series, Physics in Minutes, and so on. This is the only one of the series that I've read, but it's super good because nowadays there is a ton of information online and it's free. You can just go read about it. And the problem is, how do you sift through it? How do you tell which questions are even interesting to ask? And this book is amazing because each article is only 1 page long. So obviously there's not much covered in that 1 page, but you're getting an actual paleontologist, what they think is important to write about in one quick page. And then you can go, and if that topic happens to be really interesting to you, you can go read about it, look up all the papers that have been done on it, read the actual literature, read the Wikipedia article. You can go find it in a textbook. You can go as deep as you want. So Evolution in Minutes seriously is the book that I recommend for anybody who wants to learn about evolution, really no matter what level you're at. It's really cool. I keep finding topics in here that I've never even thought about or explored. So super good book. That was my first Q&A. The second, last Sunday, I had talked about climbing Mount Improbable really briefly. And hold on here. And I don't think I did a very good job explaining the mountain probable concept and evolution. This is something that's, Dawkins wrote about it. He wrote a book about it called Climbing Mountain Probable. But biologists who study this phenomena, they're studying what is called a fitness landscape. And I want to explain to you how fitness landscapes work in sexually reproducing organisms. It works slightly different in bacteria, actually not that much different, because bacteria they don't reproduce sexually, but they actually do share genes through plasmids and so on. But here's essentially how it works. In any sexually reproducing population, you've got a bunch of organisms, and they're really all competing with each other. The organisms in a population are competing with each other for survival and reproduction because, in general, they all consume the same resources. There are actually some species that have evolved ways around this. For example, insects, the juveniles eat totally different food than the adults, so they're actually not in competition. But in general, even children are competing with older individuals in a population. I'm talking about animals here, but the same is true for plants and so on. So this competition is driving a species towards maximum fitness within certain parameters. So you've got an environment, and it's putting on certain selection pressure. So let's just think about elephants, for example. Elephants that live in a desert in Africa. So if we got a population of elephants living in a desert in Africa, they're all living in this really dry, hot environment. And there's only a certain number of resources available to them, a certain amount of food, a certain amount of water, and so on. And so they are essentially competing with each other. Now, it's not necessarily going to feel like that within a population. There's not necessarily going to be aggression or anything like that, but there's only certain individuals that are going to survive and reproduce really well, and other individuals in that population are going to do slightly less as well, and then you'll have some that completely fail. And so natural selection is working on this population where some are really good at breeding, reproducing, surviving, others are not. And what happens is, if you were to suddenly change their environment, so you've got a diverse population, and there's a lot of different what we call alleles. An allele is an alternate version of a gene. In humans, there's actually lots of genes that control height, but you could think of there being a height allele. So some people are taller, some people are shorter. And within any given population, there is variation like this, right? Well, if we were to suddenly change the environment for these elephants, we're suddenly to make it really cold, so it starts snowing and so on. Well, this is horrible for them because they've adapted to a really dry, hot climate. But there's going to be some individuals within that population that have slightly more body fat, which helps them endure the cold in the winter. Some of you who've been watching me for a long time have heard me give this analogy or give this kind of scenario. Some in the environment might have extra small ears, and having extra small ears helps you in the cold because the ears of an elephant, actually, that's where they get rid of a lot of their heat, is through their big, huge ears. So having smaller ears would give you a slight advantage when the weather turns cold. Let's say you have a lot of hair. Some elephants, if you've ever been to a zoo, some are hairier than others. And then some have longer hair than others. And so these are all, if we just consider all of these things to be different traits in the population, all of the individuals that happen to have those traits already in the population are going to be slightly better off, most likely, than their neighbors. They're going to be slightly better at surviving and reproducing than their neighbors are. And so what's going to happen is all of those alleles, all of those different traits are going to be funneled down eventually into one population. All of those awesome traits will get bred into one little group. So if you consider each one of those individuals that has one of those cool traits, if you consider them as like a kind of a mini superhero, eventually they will start breeding with each other and make a powerful superhero with all of those traits combined. And then that individual or that group, that litter of children, will end up just being way better off than all of the other elephants in the population. And you can eventually, just through allele sorting, you can get a cold adapted elephant from a population that used to be adapted for hot weather. So this is one of the fastest ways that evolution occurs. There's a change in the environment, and all of the traits that are already in that population get reshuffled and recombined into a new population. You know, I mean, it's from the same population, but they all get funneled into a few individuals, which then dominate the population. And so this is the fastest way that evolution occurs. On top of that, any new mutation that enhances the ability to survive in the cold will also be selected for. So the first thing that happens is natural selection selects for what's already there. And then as new things pop up, those will be selected for as well. And that is how evolution happens. Well, if you think of a fitness landscape, scientists imagine that there's a fitness landscape in any environment with any species with the traits that it currently has. So if we go back to that desert population of elephants, there already are certain individuals in there that have traits that will help them survive in the cold. When we suddenly get a cold environment, we imagine this fitness landscape where there's a peak at the top of that landscape, and the top of that peak represents the optimum genes that are currently in that gene pool. So the optimum sorting of genes that are currently in that gene pool. And what's going to happen is that if you watch the population over time, they will slowly start to accumulate at the top of that peak. Anyone who's not so good at surviving in this environment, they're going to get weeded out. And only the ones that are the best are going to continue to survive until eventually we get stuck on a peak where all of the best traits have been bred into those few remaining individuals. And once you're on top of that peak, you have to wait for new mutations to happen. And that can take, who knows how long that could take. So any population already has a certain, any gene pool already has a certain potential fitness for any new obstacle that's thrown at them. And when we're studying fitness peaks, that's what researchers are trying to study, trying to figure out. Well, in Richard Dawkins' Climbing Mount Improbable, he's basically talking about these fitness landscapes throughout that book. And he talks about how you can get stuck on a peak that's actually not ideal. There might be better peaks, but your entire population got stuck on this low peak when there's another potentially high peak over there, but you can't get to it. Once your entire population is stuck on the top of this peak, to go down is not something that you can do because you're constantly competing with your neighbors. So any sort of mutation that might make it so that you could get onto that other peak is actually going to be detrimental to you until something crazy happens, until the environment switches to flatten the fitness landscape, or until some sort of a mutation happens that allows you to kind of make a jump from one peak to another. And lots of organisms get stuck on these peaks. The example that Dawkins gives in his talks is the nautilus pinhole eye. A pinhole eye is pretty good. It can see pretty well, but it can't see as well as an eye with a lens in it. But in order to evolve a lens, you have to temporarily plug that hole. And that causes a disadvantage for any organism that has a plugged eye and can't see out of it very well. Obviously, that's a disadvantage. So the environment has to change. And I talk about that in last week's video. I talked about what sorts of changes in an environment could make it so that having a plugged eye would actually be a benefit for a while. And when it is, you can actually start to get the evolution of a lens during that time. And that's one way that you could overcome being stuck on this fitness peak. So hopefully that was not too much rambling. Haven't spent a lot of time preparing this. Obviously, the point of today is a video test, but hopefully that was helpful. Let me just see if we've got any other questions here. Oh, we got lots. All right. Hi, John. Have you ever thought about making a video animation about atavisms? I've always thought this was an especially fascinating topic, and it covers both evolution and genetics. That would be good. I've actually I don't know if I do a whole animation on that, but that definitely would be good for a 113 questions about evolution. Just show a couple of different atavisms. My favorite is horses gaining the three-toed horses that pop up sometimes. For those that don't know, horses only have they walk on their middle finger and their middle toe. They've lost all of their other toes, but sometimes the three of those will pop back up, which is pretty cool. Not only that, it lets you see comparative anatomy of horse bones. And it's really obvious when you're looking at these horse bones that they used to have more fingers than they do, and they lost some. Hans asks, have you ever considered making an animated video about embryonic development? I've always tried to understand how cells know where to go and what to become. Yeah, that's actually a topic that is still beyond me right now. I've only begun to study that at a really very basic level, the actual cell signaling that happens there. And there's actually a lot that we don't understand about it. So the field that studies this right now is evolutionary development. Evo-devo is what it's often abbreviated as. And there are some good books on that. Sean B. Carroll is one of the people that I recommend looking up for information on evolutionary development and embryology. There's a lot that we don't understand about that, but there's a lot that we are just now starting to really learn. At the level of cell signaling, how it is that certain genes get turned on and turned off during embryonic development. And it's also really interesting with cancers, because one of the main things, cancer research is advancing really fast right now, but last time I was looking into the evolution of cancers, one of the really cool things that people had found is that there are mutations in cells that are fairly easy. It's fairly easy for them to happen, that will turn on fetal genes. So genes that are turned off in an adult, they'll get turned back on because of a mutation that changes how cells are being regulated in the body. And this causes tumors to grow because fetuses are obviously growing rapidly. And so if you got a bit of tissue and you turn on some of these fetal genes, you're going to get rapid cell growth. And there's also another gene that fetuses have that tells the mother's immune system, hey, I'm your child, don't kill me. And that can get turned on in a cancer as well, because your immune system is actually constantly killing cancer cells. And if that gene gets turned on, the cancer can actually ward off the host's immune system. And it actually works on men and women. We're susceptible to that gene too, even though we never have kids, which is interesting. Hi, John. I've been wondering, how did some species go from ones that don't undergo metamorphosis into ones that do? Like, there doesn't seem to be any in-between species. There actually are lots of in-between species. A grasshopper is a really good example of an in-between species. There is an interview that I did with Nancy Miarelli here on this channel where we talk about that for an hour and a half. And she's an expert. She studies this. It's what she does. So go check out that video. It's, I think it's like, what is metamorphosis or something? It's, I'll try to post a link if I remember after I shut down this video here. But yeah, we talk about that for an hour. There's lots of different species, and she shows a couple of them off. Let's see. Like your succulent example and semi-succulent plant example, are there examples of metamorphosis evolving as a process? Yes, there are. Grasshoppers go through a very gradual metamorphosis process where they develop wings and so on through multiple stages. And I can't remember what the other ones are. She has a bunch of examples in that video, though. Let's see. Someone asks, if we evolved from monkeys, why are there still monkeys? It's because populations split and they evolved down different trajectories. It's just the same reason that we have America and England, even though America sort of came from England, right? You've got a population, it splits in two, and the two populations develop independently of one another. So we came from monkey-like ancestors, and modern monkeys also came from those same monkey-like ancestors. We just evolved down different pathways. Did you see the paper, The Evolution and Anatomy of the Horse Manus, with an emphasis on digital reduction? Horses have 5 fused toes. I did not see that paper, but I have. I've seen that in museums showing that. Stated clearly, or stated casually, what is a topic you wish was taught better, more in the education system? Well, evolution, of course. It's my pet passion. But, well, evolution and genetics. I think genetics really is just taught in a way that's too complicated, so a lot of students don't get interested in it, but genetics is super interesting. And as we just heard in the news, people are starting to genetically engineer humans. So this is something it's important that we understand how it works. We're already genetically engineering our food, and it's just a matter of time before people start genetically engineering their children. And so, yeah, very, very important stuff. Let's see. Someone asked if I am familiar with the work of Donald Hoffman. That does sound familiar, but is Donald Hoffman a creationist? That sounds familiar. Sorry, Donald Hoffman, if you're not. But that name does ring a bell. I've certainly heard of Donald Hoffman, but I am not putting a face to that name. Okay. In your video discussing soft tissues found in T-Rex fossil bone, did you find information on how common this iron cross-linking preservation is in other fossils? There's very few studies that are being done on it, but it's been found. It has been talked about in frogs, I believe. There are links in the video description for that video that talk about other instances where people think that that's been happening and their fossils as well. There was, right after I published that video, there was, I was pretty strong in that video saying that consensus is largely behind Mary Schweitzer. But there was a paper that was published, actually I think it was right before I published that video, that there was another group that kind of brings into question some of her stuff. But her iron preservation research is pretty solid. We just don't know how long that cross-linking can actually preserve different types of protein. So yeah, if you look in the video description, there's links to all those papers on the Mary Schweitzer video. Oh, Rational Mind says, to be clear, that paper says that horses have remnants of all 5 toes, not just the fossil transition horses. Cool. Yeah. They're modern horses actually they've got the main middle finger, and then they've got parts of the hand bones of the pointer finger and the ring finger. So they still have those. But yeah, I did not hear that they still have the thumb and the pinky, so that's cool. I'll have to check that out. What's the difference between phylogeny and cladistics? It's the study of the same thing, really. Cladistics is a new way of naming things. So there are naming system differences between the two. So far as I know, that's the main difference. But I mean, cladistics is the study of phylogeny, but we used to name everything just by in a Linnaeus type fashion. And cladistics is the new way of naming things according to what clade they belong to. So it puts an emphasis when we're naming an organism on its evolutionary history, which isn't always very smart, especially in the fossil record, because when we're naming stuff, we don't necessarily know or understand how it's related to other things until we study it a lot. So there are some problems there, so far as I understand. And basically, I am doing some really poor mimicking of what I've heard Darren Naish say. So if you listen to the podcast, Tetrapod Zoology, that's Darren Naish's podcast, and he is a paleontologist, and he talks a lot about cladistics and phylogeny, and that's his jam. Shelled reptiles. So yeah, nested clades. So in cladistics, you have nested clades, or rather than groups. So it's a little bit different. How does the double helix shape expand the lifetime of DNA strands compared to RNA? So RNA can actually form a double strand as well. Oh, I'm told that my Wi-Fi seems to be working just fine from out here. That's good. The double helix can be formed in RNA just as easily as it does in DNA. In DNA, everything's usually inside the nucleus. Everything's in a nice, stable, double-stranded form. RNA can do that too. It's just RNA typically is only copied one strand at a time to make messenger RNA, and that messenger RNA will end up folding in on itself and forming these complex three-dimensional structures because it usually can't perfectly base pair with itself to form a double helix, but RNA can do that. The reason DNA is more stable than RNA, there's a couple of reasons for this. Just the backbone, the sugar backbone is a little bit stronger in DNA. But I think actually the main reason would be that there's more RNase enzymes floating around inside of a cell. And actually they're floating around in tap water. So RNase is a really complicated protein. And what it does is it finds chains of RNA and it destroys them. And there's tons of them inside of cells. And we need these inside of our cells because we need to fight off viruses and other things that might be spitting in foreign genes into our bodies. And so we produce a lot. All of our cells produce lots of RNase. And it's found in tap water. And actually, one of the labs that I work for, that I do videos for, this is my client work that's not shown on stated clearly. They do cancer research, and they were doing some experiments with RNA, and the guy was a physicist that was doing the experiments. He was not a biologist. He never really studied biology, but he was doing these RNA experiments, and he was getting so angry because his RNA would just turn to garbage immediately, and it's because he was purifying tap water to use in it, and he wasn't purifying it enough to get rid of the RNase. So there's so much RNase floating around in this world that RNA cannot survive almost anywhere on our planet because there's these really complex protein machines, you could call them, that are just floating around in water everywhere, gobbling up chains of RNA. Mr. Edit Undo says, "Oh, thanks for the answer. I kind of hate some names of species nowadays, like the Thanos Dino Psi." Well, yeah, people will name things funny things all the time. Whatever is easy to get remembered. When you're a scientist, you're passionate about whatever the heck it is that you discovered, right? And you want people to remember it. One way to get people to remember your fossil is to name it something weird. So it gets headlines. It's like clickbait, but for scientific research. So Donald Hoffman argues that natural selection, rather than selecting for accurate perceptions, selects for biased sense that don't see reality as it is. He has a good analogy about thinking about our senses like a computer monitor interface. Okay, I do know Donald Hoffman, and I haven't gotten into his argument very deeply, but I've heard a version of it. I think I heard him giving a talk or something, and it didn't seem to make sense to me. Like, I believe I would have to look deeper into what he's talking about to actually give you an intelligent response. But it seems like he seems to think like he was talking about a polar bear. There's something interesting that he brings up, but then it seemed to me like he took it too far. Like, he was saying that we can't know for sure that natural selection selected for white bears to live in the Arctic because there's lots of things that cause white fur. And so they might have been selecting for something else. And that's certainly true. I think with polar bears, it is pretty obvious that they were selected for their white fur, but for their color, for their camouflage, because of the way that they hunt. They depend on camouflage to hunt. But it is certainly true that a lot of times we'll jump to conclusions. We'll look at something and think that it's an adaptation when in fact it's not. That actually happens all the time. But Hoffman's argument seems to go way beyond that, and I don't quite understand the rest of it. I'd have to look into it more. That was just the one legitimate criticism that I saw that he gave. We certainly do. We see adaptation where it might not actually be. Stated casually. Hi, John. For us computer geeks, how about a video on genetic algorithms? That is, using the concept of evolution to solve really hard computing problems. That would be a good video. I do not know much about it. I talked to a guy who does that with robots when I was in Washington, D.C. speaking years ago at the Science Festival. And it was super cool, but I don't have connections. I lost his card. I can't even remember his name. So if you know anyone who's messing with those, let me know, because that would be a fun topic to cover. And especially if you know anyone in the Montreal area, which is where I'm living right now, that'd be really cool to go to actually just have someone on the show to talk about it. Because again, I do not know much about it. Well. Oh, Joe Blog says I'm doing it with robots right now. Well, let's do a video together. Send me an email, john@statedclearly.com, JON@statedclearly.com, and we'll do a video like next month. We could do a Sunday morning science thing. Ritzy Ritz asks, how close are we to producing life in the lab? That kind of depends on what you mean by that, because we've done it already. We've artificially created a genome of a bacteria and inserted it into a dead bacteria and made it, do its thing, start living. We've also simulated a bacteria in a lab, but in both of those instances, we are just copying biology. So I don't really count that as creating life in a lab. That's just rebuilding something that we studied really well. And in the case of the cell, all we did was insert a genome into it. So it already had all of everything else was already there. So there are a couple of experiments on RNA, trying to get RNA to really take off and evolve on its own. And that stuff is not, so I think it's the Sostak lab, I'm probably saying his name wrong, that is doing a lot of stuff on that. And he's not one of the guys that I work with in Life Origins research. The people that I'm working with in Life Origins research are focused more on alternatives to RNA and different types of molecules that could have easily been started in an early world environment. And particularly, they're looking at things that would have easily formed in puddles during like day-night cycles. So there's a lot of different research groups that are out there that are studying different aspects of the origin of life. And Sostak's lab is the one that's doing the most with the RNA world. So I think they're if something's going to happen, it's probably going to come from them, but they won't be solving it. They won't be solving the origin of life problem from the very beginning. They won't be solving, how do we get RNA? They're just going to be solving, once you have RNA, how do you get it to replicate without modern enzymes? And then how do you get those replicators to eventually produce something like a cell? So that seems to be what his lab is focused on right now. So that, once that happens, and it's looking fairly close, I'd drink some champagne to that. That would be pretty cool. Hi, John. Okay, that one I already did. Shelled Reptile asks, how can polyphenism evolve in a nutshell? I don't know enough about that topic. People are getting lag in the video stream. Is everybody else getting that lag too? Have you done a video about the Chinese designer CRISPR babies? No, I have not. I actually haven't even read about what's happening yet. I mean, I've seen that there's stuff being published on that, but I haven't looked into it. So I couldn't even comment on that right now. I just know that supposedly it's happening because of some stuff that came through my Facebook feed. I probably should have looked up that before doing this video, because obviously that's a question that people are going to be having right now. Rational Mind says, unfortunately, this was an example of sensationalism in the media. We've known for decades that mitochondrial DNA can be inherited from fathers in exceptional circumstances. That is about the mitochondria being passed from a father to offspring. And yes, I would say that that's blown up in the media, but I actually don't mind, because the article that was done on that, I can't remember who wrote the article on mitochondria that I had read, but so yeah, it's now been found that in several cases, mitochondria from the father is slipping in to the offspring. And it is true, we have known about this in animals for a long time, and we've suspected it in humans. But this is the study, I think this was the best study that's really I think they found it in 7 different family lines. So that proves that it actually happens somewhat often. But the really interesting thing about this, to me, isn't the fact that mitochondria sometimes slip in from the male. The thing that's most fascinating about this is that the egg cell has a whole slew of defenses. As soon as it gets inseminated, it goes through great lengths to murder the mitochondria of the sperm. And this is what's interesting to me. What is it throughout evolutionary time that has made the egg so defensive? Why are egg cells so why are they so well adapted to kill the father's mitochondria? Obviously, it does slip through sometimes, but it's actually super, super rare. And that's a really interesting evolutionary question. And I actually just tweeted a whole bunch of papers about that the other day in a conversation between me and Acapella Science. So I'll have to link those papers in the video description here afterwards, because it's super interesting. We actually do think we know what's caused the evolution of these mitochondrial murder systems in the egg. Essentially, there's 2 things that are problematic. First of all, sperm mitochondria have high mutation rates. So if that mitochondria gets into cells, the fetus is far less likely to be viable, because sperm are they have lots of mutations in their mitochondria. And the mitochondrial genome is very streamlined. Most mutations in it that actually change the amino acid sequence of the proteins that it codes for, or that change the sequence of the functional RNAs that it acts as a template for. Most of those changes end up being detrimental, causing some sort of a, if not catastrophic failure of the fetus, cause it to be slightly weaker than other members of the population. So that's one of the big reasons that we think this mitochondrial killing mechanism has evolved. The other is that when you have two different lineages of mitochondria inside the same cell, they actually end up competing with each other to get into the next cell when the cell divides. And that competition can be really bad for the host. And so we think that both of these things are driving the evolution of the egg cell to kill the mitochondria from the sperm. Okay. So Shelled Reptile says, so will that affect the mitochondrial Eve concept? I don't think so. It happens so rarely. And so there's two things with this. It happens super rare. And also when it does happen, the mitochondrial DNA that's inherited is usually got a bunch of mutations in it. And if your mitochondria has mutations in it, usually you are going to be at a selective disadvantage. So over time, so first of all, these instances are rare. Secondly, over time, they're going to get weeded out by natural selection. The offspring, the lineages that were birthed out of those rare events are probably going to get weeded out somewhere along the line. Even if you're like even if you're 9/10 as good at surviving and reproducing as other members of your species, you will eventually get weeded out because the other members of your species are slightly better than you. And over multiple generations, your lineage will fade away. That's just how natural selection works in big populations. So I don't think it's going to really be a problem for mitochondrial Eve. If we find lots and lots and lots of paternal leakage, I think that's what they call it, paternal leakage, then maybe that will kind of mess with the calculations we've been doing in the past, but I don't think so. Are you interested in doing any videos on the sociology of evolutionary belief in the US, of people who don't believe in evolution at all, and the change of that percent over time and why? I think I will talk about that. I've talked about it from time to time, just that topic comes up. I just did an interview and several interviews of me across the internet. If you look at other people's YouTube channels, you'll find interviews of me, and that always comes up, especially there. So I probably should do some videos here on my channel talking about that as well. Basically, when people see evolution as a threat to their worldview, it becomes offensive, and people want to defend their worldview at almost all costs. The easiest thing to do is to ignore anything that contradicts your worldview, and that's what a lot of people do. But it's getting harder and harder to do that as time goes on, as we learn more about evolution and as it's more and more obvious, and as people have access to the internet. And the numbers seem to be in the favor of science, and they seem to be highly correlated with access to internet. So the internet seems to be, in large part, fixing this problem, but it also makes the problem worse for those that are absolutely bent on not accepting evolution, and they tend to get more aggressive. So it's kind of like a weird double-edged sword. I mean, just read the comments in my YouTube videos and you'll see a bunch of very, very angry people. Speaking of mitochondria, I've always wondered about how exactly they produce energy for the cell they live in. That's a good question. They don't actually produce energy. And this is a really common misconception. Everyone, oh, the mitochondria, it's the powerhouse of the cell. What they do is they metabolize our food. in a very specific way that creates a molecule called ATP, which is a highly volatile molecule. Like you bump it the wrong way and it'll break apart. And it's that molecule that our proteins have evolved to use to power their movements. They'll grab onto it on one end and grab onto it on the other end and break it apart, and that causes their movements. That causes some of the movements in proteins. There's other ways that proteins move as well. So it's not so much that they're producing energy, they're using energy to make ATP. But they make this really nice, neat little molecule where there's a bunch of energy packaged tightly together that other parts of our body use. Rational Mind about the mitochondrial thing says, don't get me wrong, it's an important new study, but yeah, it's been inflated by the media. Yeah, well, I mean, that always happens, right? But I think that they focused on the wrong part. The focus should have been on, what the heck? Egg cells are killing the mitochondria of sperm? That's amazing. Why is this? And we already think we know the answer to that question. But that's what I think is the most interesting when you study evolution. But I suppose, as mentioned here, if we keep looking for this and we find it all over the place, it would make us question our mitochondrial Eve numbers. So that would be big news. But yeah, you're right. It was a little bit overblown. How important is the work of Karl Popper and Thomas Kuhn in your mind? I actually haven't studied their work deeply myself. I'm just sort of I've inherited the scientific philosophy that they produced. I mean, a lot of people don't like philosophy. I've actually noticed a lot of scientists don't like philosophy. And when you dig into philosophy papers, it's like they're arguing about things that you think you shouldn't even bother even thinking about. And they're just arguing about it for on and on and on, back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. But it actually is really important because the field of science emerged from philosophy, and continued philosophical thought and debate is actually important, and it informs the scientific community indirectly. I've been informed indirectly by Karl Popper. It just sort of bleeds over into the ether, of the culture in science. So yeah, I think their work is important, but having not studied it directly, I can't pinpoint the ideas in my brain that actually came from Karl Popper, but I'm sure there are some ideas in my brain that I take for granted that came from him. Have you considered a whiteboard to draw and help answer these questions? That would be great, but this was kind of an impromptu video. I had zero planning here, and it was just to test my internet connection in the dining room because I'm going to be doing a video here on Sunday, interviewing another guy. By the way, that video is going to be really cool. Stefan is a linguist, and a lot of people think linguists, language, English literature, but no, linguistics it's a hard science. A linguist studies how it is that languages work, and language is a natural phenomena. And so actually his research was done on what he did, what a lot of linguists do. He studied people speaking in a language that he does not speak. That kind of helps you step out of your own world, because we use speech all the time. And it's really hard to study speech when you're so used to using it. So he was studying French speakers when he did his research. But he's going to be talking about this field that we now call linguistics, and it's brand new. It's like 60 years old or less as a science. But it's really neat because not only do they do experiments with humans, they do and studies on different populations, but they also do experiments on animals to see how are animals using language or things like language. what are their communication systems like, and how do they differ from ours? And it's gonna be really cool. I'm excited. Rational Mind says that mitochondria is more like a battery factory than a powerhouse, perhaps. Yeah, I've also heard it referred to as an oil refinery. You get the crude oil in, and then you turn it into the stuff that's useful. And I like both of those analogies are better than powerhouse of the cell, because yeah, mitochondria does not generate energy from nothing. It's using chemical reactions. It's using electron transfer. It's using the food that we eat to create ATP. Have you had any young Earth creationists credit you with eventually accepting evolution? If not, I hope so in the future. Your animations and videos are so well done. I've had a lot of people write me letters saying, I'm a creationist and I'm watching your videos and I'm finding it really interesting. Thank you for presenting it in a kind way, because a lot of people have had issues with the way that other people teach evolution online. I've gotten a lot of letters like that. I've gotten 3 where people say, I was a creationist and your videos helped me accept evolution. And I think in all 3 of those cases, they had accepted some sort of like theological type evolution, similar to biologos. Except for one person was ended up like leaving their religion and had some questions for me about that. Like, what do I do now? And my goal, by the way, is not to spread atheism or something like that, or it's not to try and get people to leave their religion. I just want people to understand evolution and really just to understand it and hopefully accept it, because it's such an interesting thing. I mean, evolution is the thing that just gets my brain going. I love thinking about how evolution works. That's why I was so excited about the mitochondria stuff. Like, why is it that egg cells kill the mitochondria of the sperm? What sort of evolutionary pressures are causing this? That I got really into that about a year ago, the mitochondria stuff. And I mean, it's just like pure joy for me to study these sorts of things. And so I want to be able to share that with people. That's my main goal. So yeah, it has worked. And those are the letters that I've gotten. I imagine that for the most part, anything that you do as an educator is like planting a seed that someone might combine with a bunch of other things that they've learned and other resources that they've had. I've gotten a lot of letters with people saying, I'm a Christian and I was actually able to watch your stuff. Thank you. Or I'm a Christian and I was able to show this to my wife and to my kids because it was presented in a way that was acceptable, and thanking me for stuff like that. So I love getting letters like that, by the way. Let's see. Rational Mind says, I recommend the book Evidence and Evolution by Elliot Sober. All about philosophy of science, particularly relating to evolutionary biology. Cool. I cannot vouch for that, but Rational Mind does seem to have a lot of good input, so I would trust that. CRISPR is an example for the need for philosophy and science as it informs ethics. Yes. So Joe Blog says that CRISPR is an example for the need for philosophy and science as it informs ethics. Yeah, so I'm a science advocate. I think that's pretty obvious. But something weird that I've noticed about science is that it's kind of unstoppable. We definitely need, philosophy and ethics are actually kind of 2 different things. And the philosophy of science is just, how do you do good science? That's the philosophy of science. But there's all sorts of philosophies, just philosophical discussions about ethics, and there should be a lot of discussions about, now that we have this technology, now that we have these new abilities that we've gained through science, how are we going to apply those new abilities? And this is definitely something that people should be considering with CRISPR. The thing is, the world is a very big place. And no matter what morals you have, no matter what sorts of rules you set down in science, there's going to be some group somewhere that doesn't adopt those values. So it's almost impossible to put something back in the box once it's been unpackaged by science. I mean, we see this with nuclear weapons, right? There's no turning back now, it seems. It gets too easy to make a nuclear bomb now. And actually, if we were to get rid of all nuclear bombs, and the technology to make them, it would get reinvented right away, because we understand how atoms work now, and it's just you can't go back on that. So, some people do worry, and I think this is a legitimate concern. Are we going to kill ourselves? Is curiosity going to kill the cat? And it's certainly possible. The world could end in a giant scientific bang. Let's see. Oh, when will you do the debate with the author of Evolution 2.0? I did that. I have not edited it yet. That'll go up next week. There was just, as you can see, when I'm just on camera like this, I do a lot of ums and buts and sort of stutterings. And he also has kind of the same issue. So I'm just going through and cutting out stuff like that to really streamline it. But yeah, that's going up. It should be up by Tuesday. I actually said that last week, but it should be up by this Tuesday. And Perry Marshall and we actually agree on more than we disagree about. I mean, I'm not religious, so I don't hold those same issues as he does. And on the main crux of his book, the crux of his book, I would say, he would not say this, but I would say that the crux of his book, like the main point of his book, is to say that the genetic code proves that God exists. And I, of course, do not accept that. But that's not what we talked about. Our debate was whether or not there is teleology in biology, so purpose and meaning in biology. And I had him define that in the way that he wanted to. And the way that he defined it, actually, we didn't actually have a whole lot of conflict. So we ended up just having a really interesting discussion. There is some conflict in our discussion, but we mostly just have an interesting discussion. We tease out, what these different things mean. And I just basically explained that I would use different wording than he would on a lot of this. But overall, since writing that book, he got a lot of crap for that book. And he's been in a lot of discussions with people after writing that book. And I think he has a much cleaner understanding about how evolution works now than he did when he wrote that, which is great to see. What are your opinions on endangered species and the idea of entering a new mass extinction event due to humans? It does seem quite obvious that we are killing massive amounts we're causing the extinction of all sorts of organisms. I mean, we are just growing at a ridiculous rate. Technology has allowed us to live in every continent. I mean, we don't do a whole lot of living in Antarctica, but we are there. And we've just expanded into all these different territories. I've witnessed the devastation. I used to volunteer at the Portland Zoo. I also did some volunteer work at the Knoxville Zoo when I lived in Tennessee. And at the Portland Zoo, they're doing a lot of research and rehabilitation on some kind of turtle. I'm forgetting what kind it was now. But the numbers, if you just go back throughout history and see what the numbers used to be and what they are now, it is catastrophic. We are destroying all sorts of different little habitats that we're just making them completely unlivable for the organisms that evolved in those habitats. And we're bringing our cats and our diseases and our, in the case of this turtle, it was the bullfrog that people brought to the West Coast during the pioneer days. And a lot of it the bullfrog came up from California. And so the gold miners were using it as food. So they brought the bullfrogs because they wanted to hunt them. So they were releasing them and then hunting them as a food source. Because actually, I don't know if you've ever had bullfrog legs, but they're actually pretty tasty. And they've just devastated populations of turtles up the coast, up the west coast, up into Oregon. And that's just one tiny example of things that we're doing. Some things get really weird in the endangered species movement because we get these, our favorite animals, like the spotted owl is one example of this, where the spotted owl, if you want to be really strict about the definition of a species, isn't really a species. It's a population. It can interbreed and does so quite readily with the barred owl, but it was put on the endangered species list before the barred owl made it to the West Coast. And the barred owl migrated to the West Coast on its own, up through Canada and then down. And since making contact, the two populations are now interbreeding, and this is just wreaking havoc on environmental issues there, because we built all the laws in Oregon based on preserving the spotted owl. We focused all of our energy on this one species, and the spotted owl requires old growth forests to live in and to thrive in. And so we were able to preserve a bunch of old growth forests. Well, this is wonderful for many reasons, because there's lots of species that depend on old growth forests. But unfortunately, this interbreeding with the barred owl is screwing things up. And now logging companies are saying, hey, this isn't really a species. And furthermore, there's all sorts of the spotted owl is no longer in this forest that you're protecting, so we want to take it back over again for logging. So there's lots of issues in how we do environmental protection, but should we be doing it? Yes, I absolutely think that we should. And in spite of all those different problems with defining a species and with picking these pet species that we care about, I still think that we should be doing it, and we should be spending resources on this. We should be spending money on this. It is an important thing. And I hope that we find a way to just, I don't know, stop being such jerks on our planet, stop consuming everything. And I don't know what it would take for that to happen, aside from a catastrophe that wipes us out. And I don't want that to happen either. I think humans are awesome. What are your, oh, that was the one I just read. Is the egg defense a conserved mechanism from early life, split between eukaryotes of animal and plant? Yes, but there have been reversals. So there are some plants where it's the pollen. It's very rare, but there have been some reversals throughout evolutionary history. And there are a whole multitude of different defenses that different organisms use. So the defenses that we find in human egg cells are not found everywhere. They're found in animals. I think they're found in all mammals, sorry. And then parts of these systems are found in other organisms as well. But yeah, in almost every single species, the mitochondria only comes from the mother, from the female, and in some cases it comes only from the sperm, but it's super rare for it to come from both places. And we think that the main reason for that is that there's this, when you have two lineages of mitochondria, there becomes competition amongst the mitochondria, and when they're competing with each other, that causes problems. There's also some other problems. When a mitochondria has DNA damage, it will attach to another mitochondria, and they'll actually do this thing where they compare their genomes and make corrections. And that mechanism doesn't work well if you have two lineages of mitochondria. There's all sorts of reasons why you only would want, from an evolutionary perspective, why it's beneficial to kill the mitochondria either from the sperm or from the egg, to only keep one. Tell us an evolution joke. Oh, I don't think I know an evolution joke. Well, I did one. I think it's evolutionary question number 5 on this channel is an evolution joke. So I won't spoil that for you. You can watch it. But my favorite biology joke is, why did the vulture cross the road? And I'll answer another question before I answer that. Let's see. Can you do a video on universal Darwinism? I don't really even know what you mean by universal Darwinism. Will you be a guest on the Atheist Experience? Sure, if the Atheist Experience wants to have me on there. I don't typically think of myself as an atheist. There's actually a debate going on Twitter right now. It was really annoying about what is an atheist, what is an agnostic, and it was just, I got tagged in it, and it just blew up my Twitter feed all day yesterday. I actually don't typically go around calling myself an atheist because it's not a big part of my life, but I am not religious. And so by most people's definition, I would be an atheist. I don't believe in God or gods. And I'm very skeptical when people tell me their stories about God or gods, because if you've been watching my channel for a while, you know that I was raised Mormon, and it was really hard for me to break out of that. I was in my 20s before I broke out of it, and it messed with my head quite a bit. And so now I suppose I'm extra cautious when anyone brings up anything religious. Let's see, shelled reptile. What is a species? That's a long conversation. I like the biological species concept. A species is a group of organisms that can interbreed with each other and have viable offspring. But of course, that doesn't work well if you're looking at bacteria, because bacteria don't breed technically. And it also is really hard to tell if two things are a species or not, because like I said, with the spotted owl, we thought that there was the spotted owl species and the barred owl species. But when the barred owl made contact with the spotted owl, they were able to breed pretty much just fine. There are some problems that they have, but they do produce viable offspring. So under the biological species concept, they would be considered one species. They would be different ecotypes of the same species. So an ecotype is a population that's adapted to a different ecosystem than the rest of the population. Let's see. Yeah. Ethan Ross says, it's a simple definition because obviously all life on Earth are vertebrates that reproduce sexually. Yeah, that's the problem with the biological definition, is it doesn't work in many cases. And actually, if you were to use that definition, you'd have to consider pretty much all bacteria to be one species, because they all do share genes with each other. There's a lot of horizontal gene transfer through plasmids and so on. So yeah, it's problematic. I like to think about organisms as populations, not species. Yeah, I think that's a good way to do it. It's just the tradition. The species concept is problematic for many reasons. Well, I'm going to end it there. I think that's a little bit over an hour, I think. I was a little bit rambly. I apologize. Again, these were just kind of, this was a spur of the moment idea, and I did not prepare. I don't have my whiteboard. But yeah, I will see you all on Sunday morning at 10 a.m. Pacific time. We're going to learn about language, what the heck language really is, how it is that our communication system differs from the communication systems found in chimpanzees and other animals. And I am very excited about this. Like I said, linguistics is a very new science. So new that, well, I guess Noam Chomsky is the guy that's considered to be the father of linguistics, who really kind of gave it a biological push, or a scientific push. And because he's still alive and he's the guy that kind of invented the field, people have had trouble making advances in it, because if he doesn't like an idea, he'll kind of stomp it out and everybody listens to him. So there's a lot of really interesting things that we'll learn about here, because not only are we going to learn about the things that have been discovered in linguistics, we're going to learn about the problems that happen in science, especially in a young field of science like this. And it's going to be really cool. I'm excited. Let's see. One more question. Have you ever thought about doing more general subjects than just evolution? I mean, as broad as politics and other stuff. I feel the world could use your style. I hate politics. I really hate politics. It's like the reason I hate politics so much is that it's the same type of arguing that you have to do in biology, except for there's not actually a right answer. In science, there's a right answer, and in politics, everything depends on the values that you possess. You know, if you don't value the well-being of your neighbors, your politics are going to be way different than someone who does. And then if you value the well-being of your neighbors, but you think that tough love is the way to go when someone's having troubles versus, you know, meeting someone's needs, like, these are value choices. And I just like, yeah, politics drives me nuts for this reason, arguing about politics. And then also there is, if you say the wrong thing, you lose half your audience. So it's kind of the media around politics is become very polarized, and someone should fix this problem, but it's not me. I am branching out a little bit more to do stuff on chemistry. I'm working with the Center for Chemical Evolution, which is origin of life chemistry, but I'm also working with the Castle Research Center. That is the Center for the Space-Time Limit in Chemistry. And they are doing molecular imaging. And so I'm doing a whole series of videos for them right now, which is a lot of fun. And, you know, chemistry is the foundation for biology. And so it makes sense. Everything I'm doing there is really relevant. I suppose you could say that there are a lot of things in politics that are linked to biology. Endangered Species Act, for example, is heavily linked to biology. But yeah, I just don't want to go there. I just don't. Polypeptide. Someone wanted me to say the word polypeptide. A polypeptide is something like a protein where you've got a bunch of individual peptides that come together to make a chain. You just lost me when you said politics has no right answer. Well, see, that's what I'm talking about, right? You say the wrong thing and you lose your audience. But no, I really think, you know, Sam Harris wrote a book about science studying morality. And I agree that science can study morality if you all agree on the basements of what you care about. You know, if you are concerned for well-being for mortal human beings while they're alive, then science can study, well, what does well-being look like? First off, how do we know if someone is well versus not well? And how can we improve things so that more people can be more well off, have more well-being? But all that depends on this goal of increasing well-being for all people. And you could disagree on whether or not that's a goal we should have, you know, or maybe if you're religious and you believe in an afterlife, add that into the equation, and the things that you come up with, even using science to study, you know, if you're a Muslim, for example, you can study the Quran and then use science to figure out how you can get the most people to obey the commandments in the Quran, because for you, well-being is in the afterlife. Well, the conclusions you come to will be very different than the conclusions that someone comes to if they're just looking for well-being in this mortal realm, right? So that's where politics gets crazy. If you have different starting points, you're not going to come to the same conclusions, and that's why it drives me nuts. Oh, I forgot to finish my biology joke. Why did the vulture cross the road? Because the chicken didn't make it. That's why. So there you go. All right. Well, that's it. I am signing out. It was fun. Maybe I'll do a random one of these some other time without giving people enough warning. It was fun. I'll see you all on Sunday.